Ernest Shackleton stared at the wreckage of the Endurance and made a decision that would either save every single man under his command or doom them and become forgotten souls in the frozen hell of Antarctica. When we think about heroes, we often envision fearless warriors different from the rest of us. But the truth about Ernest Shackleton's legendary rescue mission is far more human than you might expect. It's 1914. The world is tearing itself apart in the Great War. But Shackleton has his eyes on a different kind of conquest. He wants to be the first man to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition would advance science, geography, and make Shackleton a famous explorer. 27 men signed up to follow him into the unknown. Scientists, sailors, photographers, even a stowaway teenager. They believed they were joining a glorious adventure that would write their names in the history books. They had no idea they were sailing toward one of the most terrifying survival stories ever recorded. Ernest Shackleton wasn't supposed to be a hero. Born in Ireland in 1874, he was the son of a doctor. Ernest couldn't sit still in a classroom. While other boys studied Latin, Shackleton dreamed of horizons that had never been crossed. At 16, he abandoned his education and signed up as a merchant sailor, determined to explore the world's most remote places. Over the next 2 decades, Shackleton worked his way up from ordinary sailor to certified ship's master, learning navigation, leadership, and survival skills on vessels all around the world. But his real dream was to become a great explorer. In 1909, he'd led the Nimrod expedition that came within 112 miles of the South Pole before being forced to turn back. So close he could almost taste victory. And just 2 years later, he could only watch as Norwegian rival Roald Amundsen claimed the prize. The failure gnawed at him. While the world celebrated Amundsen, Shackleton plotted his comeback. He would attempt something even more audacious than reaching the pole. He would cross the entire Antarctic continent, gathering scientific data along the way. Now, Antarctica isn't some winter wonderland. It's a frozen hellscape where blizzards rage for days, where darkness lasts for months, and where help is thousands of miles away. But at 40 years old, this could be his last chance to leave his mark on the world. He'd already spent the family inheritance on this risky venture, leaving his wife Emily worried about their finances. But Shackleton was determined. On August 1st, 1914, the Endurance cast off from London. For 4 months they sailed through some of the roughest seas on the planet. But as they pushed deeper into the Weddell Sea that December, the ice was forming faster and earlier than anyone expected, positioning itself like a trap. On January 18, 1915, the Endurance got stuck in floating ice. But it wasn't unusual. Ships got stuck in Antarctic ice all the time. You just waited for an opening and then pushed through. Shackleton had done it before. But this ice was different. For 10 months, Shackleton watched the pressure build. Day by day, the ice squeezed tighter. The ship groaned and crackled. Shackleton knew they were in trouble, but he couldn't show it. The crew looked at him for answers he didn't have. But Shackleton understood that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about keeping hope alive. So, instead of answers, he maintained daily routines, organized entertainment, and led by example. All while calculating how long their supplies would last if the worst happened. On October 27, 1915, disaster struck. Under relentless pressure from the shifting ice, the ship's hull began to buckle and splinter. They abandoned ship, and weeks later their home for the past 10 months finally disappeared beneath the ice. 28 men now stood on a pack of ice in the middle of the Weddell Sea. No radio, no rescue ship, no way to tell the world they were even alive. Shackleton gathered his men and spoke words that would determine the future of their lives. They were going home, walking. The plan was daring. They would drag their lifeboats across the ice until they reached open water and then sail to the nearest land. Except the nearest land was Paulet Island, 350 miles away, across ice that shifted and could shatter without warning. They started walking on October 30, 1915. Within hours they realized the ice had other plans. Every step was a battle. The surface looked solid, but underneath lurked crevasses deep enough to swallow a man whole. The sledges carrying their boats kept breaking through what appeared to be solid ground. After 3 exhausting days, they had covered exactly 1 mile. Shackleton made the hardest decision of his life. They would stop walking, make camp, and let the drifting ice carry them north toward open water. For 5 months, they lived like castaways on a frozen island that could break apart at any moment. They ate seal meat, melted ice for water, and strictly rationed their supplies of biscuits and dried food. And when the supply ran dangerously low, they caught and ate penguins and even boiled leather boots to make soup. They huddled in tents while blizzards tried to tear them apart. All the while, photographer Frank Hurley documented their ordeal, creating some of the most iconic images in exploration history. But here's what made Shackleton legendary as a leader. While his men focused on survival, he focused on their morale. He organized entertainment and settled disputes before they could fester. When supplies ran low, he ate less so others could eat more. When hope was lost, he found ways to make them laugh. One crew member later wrote that Shackleton seemed to sense exactly what each man needed, exactly when he needed it most. But by April 1916, even Shackleton's optimism couldn't hide the truth. The pack of ice was shrinking, food was running out, and the Antarctic winter was coming. 6 months of near total darkness where rescue would be impossible. On April 9th, their world literally fell apart. The ice block cracked right through their camp. Men woke to find crevasses opening beneath their tents. The remaining supplies scattered across separate ice islands, each drifting in different directions. Shackleton gathered his men one final time and pointed toward the dark water that had appeared between the breaking ice. He ordered them to launch the boats. They had one chance to reach open water before the pack ice shifted again and trapped them forever. The Drake Passage is known as the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Waves 60 feet high, winds that could flip an iceberg, water so cold that the man might survive 5 minutes before hypothermia shuts down his heart. Shackleton launched 3 tiny lifeboats with 27 exhausted men who had been living on ice for over 5 months. This journey was pure survival, a desperate sprint to any land at all. For 7 days they battled mountainous waves across 100 miles of open ocean. They had no shelter from the constant spray of freezing seawater. Their clothes froze solid to their bodies. Men hallucinated from exhaustion and dehydration. Some stopped talking entirely, their minds retreating to safer places. Navigator Frank Worsley performed one of the most incredible feats of seamanship, keeping 3 separate boats on course toward a tiny island in the vast Southern Ocean. A single mistake in his calculations could be the end for everyone. On April 15, 1916, they reached Elephant Island. It was barely more than a rock in the Southern Ocean. No trees, no shelter, no food except whatever seals and penguins they could catch. But it was land, the first solid ground they'd felt under their feet in 17 months. The men collapsed on the beach, some actually kissed the frozen rocks. They had survived what seemed impossible. But Shackleton knew Elephant Island was still a death sentence. No ship would ever find them there. No rescue mission would even know where to look. While his men recovered, Shackleton revealed a desperate plan. they would take their largest lifeboat, the James Caird, and sail 800 miles across the planet's most violent ocean to a whaling station. 800 miles in a 22-foot boat through seas that had sunk ships 10 times larger. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and 5 volunteers pushed the lifeboat into the storm-lashed waters and disappeared into the Southern Ocean. For 17 days, more than twice as long as their first ordeal, they battled waves that threw their tiny boat around. They constantly scooped ice-cold water to keep them from sinking. Navigator Frank Worsley again performed incredible navigation, using only brief glimpses of the sun through the storm clouds. On May 10, 1916, they spotted the cliffs at King Haakon Bay, South Georgia Island. But the struggle wasn't over. They had landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station was on the opposite coast, across 36 miles of uncharted mountains and glaciers that had never been crossed. Shackleton, Tom Crean, and Frank Worsley left the other 3 men on the beach and began walking across hostile terrain. For 36 hours straight, they climbed ice walls, crossed glaciers in complete darkness, and descended slopes so steep they had to slide down on their backs. On May 20, 1916, 3 exhausted men appeared at Stromness whaling station. But their suffering wasn't over yet. The first rescue ship couldn't break through the ice. 22 men were still trapped on Elephant Island, and winter was coming. It took Shackleton 4 attempts and 3 months to reach Elephant Island again. Ice kept blocking every rescue vessel. But on August 13, 1916, the Chilean naval tug Yelcho finally broke through. When Shackleton counted the men waiting on the beach, his heart nearly stopped. 22 figures stood there, exactly the number he had left behind. Ernest Shackleton had brought every member of his crew home alive. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition was technically a complete failure. They never crossed the continent. They never reached the South Pole. They never accomplished their scientific objectives. Yet, this failed expedition became one of the most legendary survival stories in human history, because Shackleton understood something that separates a good from a great leader. When everything goes wrong, your only job is to bring your people home. But for Shackleton, the biggest challenge would be the most ordinary one. Shackleton returned to Britain as a hero. King George V knighted him, crowds cheered, and he wrote a best-selling book about the expedition. But the man who had conquered Antarctica couldn't conquer ordinary life. He struggled with crushing debts from the expedition. Business ventures failed. His marriage suffered from years of absence and financial stress. The restless explorer who had saved 27 lives couldn't save himself from his own wanderlust. In 1921, at age 47, Shackleton launched one final expedition, the Quest Voyage to Antarctica. But on January 5, 1922, while anchored at South Georgia Island, Ernest Shackleton died of a heart attack. His wife Emily made a decision that would perfectly capture who he was. Shackleton was buried in South Georgia, forever part of the landscape that had defined his greatest triumph. Modern business schools study Shackleton's leadership methods. Military academies analyze his decision-making. Psychologists examine how he maintained morale in impossible circumstances. Why do you think Shackleton was such an effective leader out there, but couldn't succeed in regular life? Let me know in the comments. And while Shackleton conquered the ice, another legendary figure fought his battles in a world of steel and blood. The warrior philosopher Miyamoto Musashi. So don't miss it and subscribe for more legendary tales of the makers of history.